So you have to think about what you really want, why you don't want this, right? Why do you not want this? So for smokers, sometimes we'll have them write down on the outside of the cigarette pack everything that seems to be working. That seems to be working. There we go. We have them write on a tight piece of paper wrapped around the cigarette pack by rubber bands, many rubber bands. So every time you want to go to get a cigarette, you have to see all the reasons why you do not want a cigarette. And then you have to take off all the rubber bands, and it's so much work. And then you can kind of replace what's going on with what you want. There are two other techniques. They're alternative techniques, and I haven't seen the studies, but I was trained on them. I was trained by an alternative medicine provider that battlefield acupuncture here in your ear. Not battlefield, another version, but in a regular acupuncture can help with cigarette addiction, right? And some people get hypnosis for smoking. We've talked before about how hypnosis is not safe for everybody, how it has been linked to the development of dissociative identity disorder. And of course, there's not tons and tons of evidence for it as anything other than a branch of mindfulness. And that's the case, right? That's the case. That's helpful. But a similar thing can be done for not smoking, where, for example, you would put a note on your computer or a note on something else. I've heard of people that what they do for something specifically, like a pornography thing, is that they have a software set up that will send all the websites they look at to an accountability partner. There's good or bad to this. One, you don't want to be tempting your accountability partner if they have the same struggle that you do. Some people I've heard of having it set up so that, like, they want to get it over, and so they then have their computers send all their websites to their pastor, which I think, wow, you're a poor pastor. But it's kind of like a bomb and like ultimate distraction thing, because for some people shame is hated myself for it, but I couldn't make it go away because repression does not solve the problem. Trying to just make it go away doesn't solve the problem. And this is both a psychological and a spiritual reality, right? We know psychologically repression doesn't work. Freud was a dummy, but his daughter came up with the healthy psychological coping mechanisms. Repression is not one of them. We've talked about suppression, which is where you set aside the desire for the time being so you can function on something else. Obviously, somebody who has an addiction can't do that appropriately. So another one is humor, right? It's a good defense mechanism. Laugh it off. And then a third one is sublimation. And that is by far my favorite. And obviously for somebody like me who's attracted to women but out of faith believe that I shouldn't be with humor, this becomes even more complicated because it can become just only repression. So it was nice to learn sublimation, learn taking that desire and channeling it into something else. An extreme version of sublimation is like I've mentioned before. I've talked about, say you have somebody who has antisocial personality disorder, but they're a good person and they don't want to act on those desires, right? And they might have very, this is an example of not feeling the drive to do something and then doing it, right? Because somebody with antisocial personality disorder might, for example, feel the drive to stab children. You should not stab children. Don't do that, right? So, just because you have a drive doesn't mean you should do it. Because other people's rights matter too, and because we can have unhealthy drives, right? I have the drive to consume excess carbohydrates at night when I'm anxious. It's not healthy for me. In fact, it's slowly killing me. I'm starting to spill glucose into my urine, right? So we shouldn't be doing things just because we want to. We need to go by with what's actually scientifically healthy. And the problem is that a lot of times we don't know what's healthy for us. Common knowledge can even be wrong, right? For a while, doctors were saying smoking was okay. Information outside of us is how we find the truth. So that's why I think it's so important, whether in scriptures or in science, to try to dig into the evidence, right? Dig as best we can. We're all going to be wrong about something, to find out what actually is the healthiest way to live, right? What is the actual rule of love? We may think, right? We may think that something is okay or loving, and it may actually not be. We may think it's loving to smoke around a child and share our cigarette with a child because it's just pleasure, and we're in the 1930s and doctors say it's okay, so not a big deal, right? So in fact it's loving, I'm sharing, introducing something nice. But there are sources that know better than we do, and obviously this is why I defer to the Tanakh, because God probably knows better than me. Whether you're deferring to scientific studies or deferring to the Tanakh, there are some things that are not healthy. So what is sublimation? Sublimation is that person who has antisocial personality disorder and has like the symptom of wanting to like stab people, right? That person replacement behavior that's going to fulfill the need, but in a healthy way that helps and benefits others and yourself and doesn't hurt them, right? It's the same kind of thing, right? The other thing is to think about reward pathways. Reward yourself for not. When I was recovering at first from the very big hole that I was in, I would give myself an ice cream every day, which was not healthy for me, but it was better than the other behavior. I would give myself an icy pop every day that I didn't do the behavior, which in that time was very difficult because, like I said, I was really not in a good place. So I remember that my breakthrough, before I could start healing, before I was just fighting something and not being able to kick this habit, I remember that for me, before I could start applying the scientific principles, the reward things, the replacement, the sublimation, before I could start applying the scientific principles, I had to look at my heart and understand what it was, right? Some people, their issue is that they are lonely and they don't know how to make healthy people interactions, right? Sometimes people smoke for anxiety, same kind of thing. You have an unhealthy behavior, and one way we can test what it is we're looking for is we go without for a little while and we try to see what is the urge that I'm having. What is it? Why am I lonely? Do I need a physical endorphin boost? So is it exercise or something else that I need? Do I have a self-hatred and this is a self-destructive behavior and I need CBT or DBT? Do I have an inner prejudice against whatever gender I'm imagining, right? Because that's a thing that can happen. And this is my way of lashing out. Am I thinking about fantasies of control because I'm not having a successful radical acceptance to accept where I am, the amount of control I have in my life? Where is my stuck point? And you write it down, you test it, you journal. But again, before I could get to any of that, before I could get to the scientific techniques, and then before I could get into looking into my inner self, I had had this breakthrough where I realized that I didn't have to be perfect on my own strength, which at the time was a big heresy to me because I was highly religious and I believed in being perfect. And I remember that whole year God didn't talk to me, and every time I opened my scripture there'd be all these passages about idols, and I'd be like, okay, what idols? I'm trying to get rid of my idols. Do you mean women? Is that my idol? Like, what's my idol that you want me to get rid of? Father. And so there was one night just really struggling with all this kind of addiction, and I decided my goal for that night was to stay up that night. And of course this is 10, 13, 15 years ago now maybe. My goal was to stay up all that night and just not do the thing that I was addicted to, right? And that was so hard. But in the morning, I had this, and again, this isn't something that I did. I was blessed to be rescued. But in the morning, I realized what I'd spent my night doing, and what I'd spent my night doing instead was looking at grades, not studying, looking at grades for hours on end, calculating GPAs, calculating my chances of publication, calculating various success metrics, how much people might like me if I did X or Y, calculating like Twitter numbers. Just, I wasn't making anything. I wasn't doing anything productive. morning, as the sun started to come up, I read this passage in Isaiah and the Tanakh, where Hashem says to his people, I see you bowed down, carrying all these heavy, heavy statue idols on your back. These heavy, heavy wooden and stone and gold items. And you're carrying them and they don't help you. But I am the God who carries you. And suddenly, for me, it was almost heretical to read that. This idea that, I don't know, it's hard to explain. But at that moment, a lot of things changed in my life. The addiction didn't magically go away, but I was able to start taking steps because all of a sudden I was free to not have my self-worth attached to it. And in fact, now I'm actually very grateful that I had such a strong attraction to women at that time, because if I had not, I would not have sought God and God's help. I would have continued down my religious path, and I would have gone to hell looking very religious, being extremely prideful, extremely angry, mistreating other people, thinking I'm so perfect, because the God of success and perfection cannot save souls. Only the real God can. And the irony, of course, is that he can also help you to become perfect and start doing the right thing, right? So when that happened, and I knew about God since I was little, I had read scripture multiple times over, at least in English, by the time I was in college. The whole thing, the Tanakh and the Bereshit. But I didn't know this God who would love and carry me. And of course, it wasn't until later that I began to find Hebrew and more Jewish scriptures, and then start to believe in obeying him in those ways, and obeying the Tanakh, and becoming more and more perfect, or more and more good. But out of love, not out of perfection. Out of joy and having somebody care about me, because you can try to keep a bunch of rules, and they're just rules, and they just wear you down and make you heavy. They become these idols that try to carry you. You can decide this behavior is bad, I don't want to do it, and then you can just bad on yourself and just be worn down by nothing. You just by feeling how small and nothing you are against the burden of all these rules and shoulds and shouldn't. Or you can find a God who will carry you and will teach you how to do these shoulds and shouldn'ts, because he loves you, because he sees value, or has put value in you. He treasures you as something that is valuable to him. Not because you're standing on your own, you have to do this in order to be good. We need to be good. But I found that I couldn't be good. And I only found that because at the time I didn't think things like anger or pride or like the religious sins of judging other people. I didn't even really think that I did them. I didn't realize until a lot later what they were doing to me. But because I had grown up in certain environments, I knew that the addiction and the addiction to women was a problem. So I'm really grateful that I had those problems, or I would never have known that I had any other problems. So sublimation. So that's the beginning of my story. Your story is going to be different. That's the beginning of my story. Then moved into starting to understand, what did I need? And I had a terrible sense of self-worth, which I still struggle with, right? Poor sense of self-worth. And at the time, I was certainly I wasn't setting myself for mental strength, setting myself up for mental strength, which is why mental health is so important to me, because I wish that I had been set up for mental resilience so that when the bad stuff happened to me, I would be better equipped to survive, which isn't my fault. It's just how your neurotransmitters are set up and how your neurotransmitters are nurtured affects, it's the same like if you have osteoporosis and you fall down and you break your leg is going to break more. Whereas if you have really strong, healthy bones and you fall down and your leg breaks, your leg's going to heal faster and you're less likely to break a bone, right? So in the same way, I'm a big fan of guilt-free mental health support anyway. So, you matter and you're worth fighting for. And you matter to someone very much who cares about you a lot and may just be waiting for your lesbian breaking point. And of course, we have many experiences since then. I'm not one of these people who says, oh, all of a sudden, then, like you see in YouTube comments, like I saw one the other day where someone was like, I met God, and all of a sudden my whole life was better, everything was fixed. That can't possibly be a real God, because if there's a God, he's outside time and space and has established in our reference plane a free will and evil, which is what we do. We do the evil, he doesn't. And outside of his reference plane, right? Everything is predestined and set already. But in the timeline where we live, if God is real, he's not going to do whatever we want all the time, because we are not perfect. So if an imperfect being gets what they want all the time, that's a petulant child. A real God that's perfect wouldn't do what an imperfect human wants 100% of the time. So these things where they say, oh, I met God and then everything was suddenly fixed. But I was no longer alone. I had him walking with me, and then started on these other journeys, started to study history and archaeology and the Tanakh, started to see science in different ways, started to dig into medicine. So even when bad things did happen, right, using the example of osteoporosis, say you're a cancer survivor and you have osteoporosis because you're a cancer survivor. I kind of see my mental health life like that, right? I had a lot of cancerous mental traits that had been acquired, passed down. I did a lot of damage to myself with addiction and other things like that, right? A lot of cancer traits, right? I recovered from that, but there's still the osteoporosis of poor mental health, neurotransmitter function, and so forth. And then when the trauma happened and it broke my bone, there were problems, right? And so that's what we're working on now. Now we're trying to recover from this broken bone, basically, psychologically. So life is not easy or simple, but there are different techniques we can use to try to go through. So sublimation, easiest scientific technique to explain. Once you've gotten to the root of what the problem is, of why it is that you have this problem, and like in my case, there were multiple things. I was also, because I really wanted to be a man since I was like a teenager or younger. I was very angry at women, and that did not help with the way that my addictive behaviors were. I also had an issue with control. I had an issue with self-abuse. I did not self-harm at that time, but the addiction was a form of self-abuse, right? Lots of different things. So there's a lot of these if you can find the lie, if you can find the iceberg, you can answer it with reality, with truth. So, right, so the idea that, right, all women are shit or something like that, we answer that with, okay, I've had some bad experiences with women, but that's not, it's impossible for that to be a universal because I have not met all women, right? So starting to learn that, or I am not worthless because I'm a woman. And that was a lot of scriptural digging, a lot of correcting, and that was where learning Hebrew was good for me, because unfortunately in a lot of churches and throughout a lot of church history that's been influenced by Roman culture. Remember, the Roman Empire was heavily sexist. If you were not a penetrator, you were a lesser person, whether male or female. So, in other words, in the Roman Empire, it was okay to be a penetrating gay male, but not a receiving, for example, right? Same kind of thing. And of course, women were only receivers, so they were lesser people. Some of that sexism really came into how English and Latin first actually interpreted certain scriptures, and learning Hebrew and learning some of the original texts of what God actually thinks about women, what God actually thinks about me, was very helpful. So that's, again, my story, different than your story. But in my case, answering the lie with the truth about what I'm worth was helpful. So that's the CBD aspect of it. Find your lies, answer them with truth. The sublimation aspect is more fun, right? I looked into what's good about, in this case, my attraction to women. What's good about it? Well, a good thing is I can recognize beauty in a way that some other people can't. So what's a way that I can celebrate beauty? Art. Obviously not pornographic art, because that doesn't help, but art, abstract art, writing stories where I express the feelings. So I write a lot as a male character, expressing those feelings and kind of not necessarily sexual feelings, but feelings of understanding beauty, right? That's a form of sublimation. Understanding strength. What kind of things do I like? What is good? Other good things about my attraction is an ability to sympathize with those who are suffering a similar issue, right? So pouring myself into that, supporting and being kind to people in those situations, right? So I found the good things and focused on those. And of course, other forms of sublimation are very biological. If it's purely a biological issue, like I just am having some hormonal situations. I mean, there are hormonals you can take, but also because I've had patients who it's a purely, I had a patient who was developmentally disabled and in serious danger because, and her family was afraid she was going to get kidnapped because her amygdala was kind of overdeveloped as far as we could understand, and she could not say no. So if anybody asked her for anything, she would do it, and she would get in strangers' cars, and we're talking about like 30 meetups a month, and she didn't like it. She didn't like that this was happening, but she just had this really strong drive. So with her permission, put her on a form of birth control that has drospirenone, which is a kind of progesterone that decreases your sex drive, right? Antidepressants can also sometimes, depending on the one, decrease your sex drive on a biological level, and also help with other hormones and create the balance that you want to live your life healthily. That's an extreme. I would not recommend medicating in most cases to deal with hypersexuality, but if you are in dangerous situations, for example, other people who are regularly contracting STDs because they can't stop, well, that's a way to help, at least until everything calms down and evens out control, right? So that's an extreme. That's only for somebody's in danger, right? Like this girl was in danger of being kidnapped because of what was going significant danger for behaviors that were ruining their careers, their lives. And so that's kind of a helpful direction to go. For most people, having an accountability partner, sublimating, other form of sublimation for physical things is exercise. When you feel like you need something, just go out and run really hard. Running does increase testosterone, but it also replaces certain endorphins, and so that can help to balance things out and repair things. The other thing is breaking the dopamine cycle, because the more you feed the dopamine cycle, the less dopamine you get for the same act, right? So it becomes, that's how addiction works. Then you have to do it more and more to get the same amount of dopamine. So even just going through the very uncomfortable process of a cold turkey abstinence for like a month can calm things down, so things are a lot easier afterwards. But it's different for everybody. So, sublimation, accountability partner, CBD, finding the lie. And I really believe before all of those things, having supernatural help is not just help, but it changes